This is Wheelbearings. I'm Dan Roth.
And I'm Sam Abu Al-Samad.
And so this is the first episode of 2019. We made it across the...
we passed another arbitrary moment in time.
Yeah, right. Time is a construct. Time zones.
Well, time is real. Time is real, but
Sure.
but measurements of time are a construct.
Well, yes, that's true. Time zones were invented by the railroads.
Yes,
It's fascinating.
I know. We didn't have time zones until the middle of the 19th century, and now there's a lot of moves to get rid of them again, because as an excuse to also get rid of daylight savings time, which doesn't actually save any daylight. You still get the same amount of daylight regardless of what time the clock says.
Well, and the hilarious thing about daylight savings time was that the argument that it was developed for farmers. And it's like, you know what? The cows need to be milked when the cows need to be milked.
That's right. I mean, that whole argument, or the argument that you're saving energy with daylight saving time, is just idiotic.
I don't know. I do like every year around my birthday, I get an extra hour back. Kinda. That's kind of.
It seems like it anyway.
Yeah, it makes me feel less guilty for sleeping in for an extra hour. Anyway, let's talk about cars. We're both actually. You have the 2019 Nissan Altima Platinum all-wheel drive. That's a pretty interesting model because it's big for Nissan. They have been talking it up, and it's pretty unique in the class now that it offers all-wheel drive. A dying class of vehicles, but that's
well, it's somewhat unique. Actually, the Fusion has had all-wheel drive ever since going back to the previous generation.
That's
so the current generation's had it all along, and then the previous generation they had it on the Sport. So going back to about 2009, I think they had all-wheel drive on the Ford Fusion.
I think that's right. Well, one of the first press cars I got was a Fusion with all-wheel drive, and it was a first gen Fusion, if I recall. So it was even before the mid-cycle refresh.
All right, anyway. I couldn't remember how far back it went, but they definitely had it for a while.
It goes back.
But at any rate, the Altima is the newest entry in the midsize sedan class, or at least what. Well, yeah, actually, it's the Altima actually is still classed as a midsize sedan according to the EPA size classifications, which are based on the combination of interior passenger volume and interior trunk or cargo volume, and we'll get to that a little bit later on.
Are those also arbitrary measurements, kind of like time?
Yes, yes, as all such things are, they are somewhat arbitrary. I think if I recall correctly, the threshold is if the combined total is 110 cubic feet, between 110 and 119 cubic feet is midsize. Between 100 and 109 cubic feet is compact. Below 100 cubic feet is subcompact, and greater than 120 cubic feet is full size or large car, as EPA calls them. And the Altima, the current Altima, comes in at about 116 cubic feet, which is a little bit less than the Toyota Camry and the Honda Accord, which both actually top that 120. But that whole using the combination of passenger volume and cargo volume has always been kind of a weird way to measure this. And in fact, it's one of the strange things about, for example, the Tesla Model S. Tesla has always called the Model S a large car, a full-size car, because its combined cargo and passenger volume is 120 cubic feet. So it just hits that threshold.
But that includes the frunk, right?
It includes the frunk, but it also includes, the fairly large cargo area, because it's a 5-door hatchback. It's got a fairly large cargo area. The frunk is only about 3 cubic feet, I think, 3 or 4 cubic feet. So it's not that big. It's enough for, a couple of soft duffel bags or, a couple of bags of groceries is about all you can fit in there. But the passenger volume of the Model S is only 94 cubic feet, which actually makes it comparable to most premium compact sedans like the Audi A4 and the BMW 3 Series, as opposed to, Tesla likes to compare it against the BMW 7 Series and the Mercedes S-Class, as large cars, but those cars are way bigger than the S.
On the outside, that's what surprises me. On the outside, the S is physically as big. It darkens it throws as much shade as those cars. But on the inside, I'm surprised it's that tight.
It's not actually very space efficient.
Huh.
And I think, and the same thing really applies to the Model 3 as well. And I think part of that is because the floor is actually a little bit higher because of the battery under the floor. So you actually lose some volume in there. But you know what? I didn't drive a Tesla this week.
No, that's true. You drove the Altima.
So we've gone off on a complete tangent for the last couple of minutes here. So I drove an Altima, which, is one of the smaller vehicles in this segment, the D segment, CD segment, which also includes, as I said, the Fusion, the Accord, the Camry. The Accord and the Camry have been the two top sellers in this segment for better part of the last 20 years.
Yeah.
Actually more than 20 years now. There have been a few years when the Accord was number one, but it's mostly been Camry during that period since the mid 90s. And in recent years, the Altima has moved up to number 3. And until its sales started tanking in the last couple of years, the Fusion was number 4. What's interesting, this new Altima debuted in the fall. So it came out about October, went on sale, September, October, went on sale. And the design is, inspired by the V Motion 2 concept that we saw in early 2017 at the Detroit Auto Show. Although it's much more toned down than that particular car. But that concept, kind of gave a hint as to the direction of the next generation of Nissans from a design perspective. And, this Altima looks quite a bit different from the previous generation Altima, which was much more, softer curves. It had creases, but, they were much larger radius creases. The edges weren't as sharp as what you see on this car. And what's interesting is, it's virtually the same size as the previous generation Altima. But when you look at it in isolation, it looks so much larger. It's got more visual heft to it.
Well, it has that giant grille now.
It has that giant grille, and also, the body sides, they look bulkier.
Yeah, they're like slab. Where I think there was more significant Coke bottle to the doors and stuff. Yeah, I can see what you're saying. It looks a lot more cohesive though. The old Altima had kind of evolved over 2 or 3 generations to what it became, and it was a little disjointed.
In some ways, I mean, I kind of like the old Altima, but and this one's not bad. I don't dislike it, but I don't know, something about it's just not quite gelling for me yet. And over time, as I get more used to that look, it may, when I saw the concept 2 years ago, the concept, looked much more visually exciting than this one. And, I think they perhaps toned down the sculpting of the body sides in particular, maybe a little bit too much. And, compared to that concept, that concept would have been very difficult to actually manufacture.
That's usually the case.
Yeah. But I guess I would have liked to have seen, maybe a little bit more contouring to the sides on the production model than what we actually got.
Well, I think too, I'm looking at it, the proportions look good, but that's always the difficult part too, is to take concept proportions and fit them onto production hardware. So I think they've done a decent job, but I can see what you're saying.
Yeah, and there's one other issue that I had with the exterior of the Altima, and if you look at the hood, the hood is done differently on this one. And it's done like a lot of newer cars, where the cut line for the hood, rather than being on the horizontal surface on the top, the hood is more of a clamshell, and the cut line for the hood now extends. There's a straight line that goes across the top edge of the headlights, and then continues on into that crease along the shoulder line. And that's fine. I have no problem with that. I think that looks fine, and that's increasingly common. And part of the reason why they do that actually on a lot of cars is it allows that hood area, that the edges of the hood, to deform a little bit more, and it's actually better for pedestrian protection. So if the car hits a pedestrian and the pedestrian goes onto the hood, it adds a little more area of potential deformation to absorb some of that energy, so it potentially doesn't cause a severe an injury to the pedestrian.
So is that because like that gap will close up, so it sort of crushes down and provides more support?
Yeah, I mean, it crushes down, and it can also splay outwards.
Yeah.
So
like if a panel that just has one dimension to deform.
Yeah. When you have if the cut line is on the horizontal surface, that those fender sides are going to be more rigid than the edges of the hood when it's wrapped over in this way.
Huh.
And that's fine. No issue there. But one thing I noticed when I first got in the car is when you're from behind, from the driver's seat area or from the door area, if you look forward at that edge of the hood, and I'll include a photo of that that we can put in the show notes, and let me drop this right in here into Slack right now so you can see what I'm talking about. But the gap there, and we've talked in fairly negative
I see what you're saying,
ways about panel gaps on the Tesla Model 3. The gap on this one, the fit just didn't seem to be very good. It seemed like there was a huge gap there, and those edges of the hood actually didn't seem to quite line up with the door panel.
Well, yeah, I mean that's an impossible. Look at what you've got coming together there. You've got the actual physical panel gap that goes off to the right from this picture, which will be in the post. But also you've got that actual, like the edge of the hood that comes up, and then it's supposed to join with that bone line or shoulder line, and there's another line from down below that's coming up at the fender for that. There's a lot going on just in that single piece. That's just impossible.
It's clearly a hard thing to manufacture and to get all those pieces lined up exactly right. And
I know what would fix it. I know one word.
What's that? Plastics.
Seriously, you could make that edge work if you used a piece of trim.
Yeah, probably. But, as is often the case, with new models like this, the press car, was a pre-production model, and, they sent a note along with that, when they delivered the car, that it was a pre-production model and that all the fit and finish, might not be 100% representative. And so I actually drove by a local Nissan dealer the other day and, took a look at a couple of new Altimas on the lot, that were for sale. To see if they were any better, if they were lined up better than this one, and they actually weren't. They were exactly the same as this one. So we'll see if this is something that they can improve on going forward. But that was the one glaring thing that stuck out to me about this.
Well, I think as we've seen,
about the look of it,
consumers are willing to accept a lot of variability.
Yeah.
And honestly, I think, I don't know.
At least some consumers are.
Yeah. That may not get as much. I mean, I guess if that's what you see looking out the driver's seat, like constantly, you're constantly staring at that. that might be a thing that bugs you. But otherwise, I think that's going to just sort of pass by. But that's a tough piece to make, because you got the edge of the hood, you got the skin that has to fold over, and you've got a relatively, sharp draw in the fender that comes up behind it. Like that's tough. I mean, I understand the challenge that Nissan has bid off for themselves. Not sure if there's a better solution. So what else? Which trim did you have?
It was the Platinum, which is the top level trim. Did you
have the VC turbo engine?
No, the VC turbo engine is what they refer to as late availability.
Oh, so also, it's not. You had all wheel drive, so I think that's a front wheel drive only, right?
I'm not sure about that. I think that may be I would be surprised if that's front wheel drive only. I wouldn't, because it's more powerful. I would expect that may even be all wheel drive only, or certainly all wheel drive available. But so right now they have an updated version of the 2.5 liter 4-cylinder that that Nissan's been using for a while. With direct injection.
That was fine. I'm assuming it's fine.
Yeah, it's perfectly acceptable. It's 189 horsepower. It's got plenty of performance. Performance is not an issue. On this one for what is a mainstream sedan. The VC turbo. This is the variable compression turbo 4-cylinder that they initially launched last summer on the new Infiniti QX50. QX50.
QX something or other.
Yeah. Trying to remember Infinity's nomenclature. It's the QX50. It uses this fairly, this kind of oddball linkage that mechanically changes the compression ratio in the engine dynamically.
Yeah, I still don't quite get how that works, but whatever. I'll look at it later. I need to see it in motion to sort of understand. It's cool.
It's a cool system, and I talked about it last year after I talked to an Infiniti engineer about it on the show. We talked about some of the benefits of that, and I'll find that episode and put a link to it. But anyway, that's not actually available in the Altima yet. It'll be available at some point during the 2019 model year. They haven't said exactly when, but at some point. But so for now, there's just the 2.5 liter, no more V6. Still with the Nissan Xtronic CVT, which Nissan does CVTs as well as anybody. They program them to behave more like conventional step ratio automatic transmissions. It feels good. Performance was more than adequate. One thing, one of the new features that they've added in the new Altima is the availability of ProPilot Assist. Which is a first in this segment.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So that's Nissan's semi-automated driving system that combines the adaptive cruise control and lane centering.
Is it the first? Is it Nissan's first offering of ProPilot Assist in the segment, or is the first car in the segment that can do those things?
The first car in the segment that can do those things.
Really?
Yeah.
I thought for sure there'd be somebody else that has that stuff already.
Nope. You've got lane keeping assist and adaptive cruise control available on most of the cars in the segment now. But, those two systems kind of operate discretely from each other. ProPilot Assist, is one of the first systems that actually combines them under one control strategy. And it's, unlike Cadillac Super Cruise, it's a hands-on system. So, if you can take if you take your hands off the wheel for more than, 5 or 6 seconds, it'll start, getting antsy and, say, hey, put your hands back on the wheel, please. And, there's no driver monitor system other than just looking at the steering angle sensor, to see, looking for those slight motions that humans make when they're holding the wheel. But it's the same system that's on the Rogue. It launched on the Rogue, in the fall of 2016, late 2016, and then a couple of months later, it came on the new Leaf. So this is the third Nissan model to get it, and it'll be coming on the updated Murano and Maxima. They're coming this spring as well. So it's it's a decent system. It's not as robust as some of the other systems that are out there. Like Super Cruise or even Autopilot, but it works okay, and in that it takes some of the load off of having to make sure that you're staying in the middle of the lane. It does a pretty good job of lane centering at highway speeds. It's not recommended to use it around town or on rural roads. It's not gonna if you're driving down a twisting country road, it's not gonna keep you in the lane. It will drift out of the lane. It's got limits on how much.
Also by design that it has those limits too, so you don't get too cocky. Or too complacent.
because it's not really designed as a a full-time autonomous system. So it's not going to try to keep the car in the lane, during fairly aggressive driving, but in fairly low effort driving, kind of thing where you tend to get bored and your attention perhaps drifts off a little bit on the highway. It will keep the car on the straight and narrow and, follow highway curves without any difficulty. One other thing that they've done in this one compared to some other recent Nissans that I've driven, it's got their latest infotainment system, with the pretty much the increasingly ubiquitous stand up display on top of the dash, that kind of like a tablet mounted on top of the dashboard. Unlike the Leaf and the Nissan Kicks that I drove a couple months ago, this one actually has a really nice screen. Those cars, they had the same system, but the display, the physical display, was not very good. It was fairly low contrast. Not especially bright, hard to see in some lighting conditions. This is a much better quality display, and so it was much more pleasant to use. And it does have support for Android Auto and Apple CarPlay, and the Altima also includes USB Type-C ports in addition to the old style rectangular Type A ports. So if you have a newer Android phone that uses USB-C, you can use that cable, which gives you faster charging than the USB-A ports. So you can get 15-watt charging.
Yeah, and I think that's going to start to become more ubiquitous. I've started to see that in several vehicles that I've had. Yeah,
FCA's done it in in the new Rams and in the Jeep Wrangler. GM's got it in the Silverado and Sierra, the new Silverado and Sierra, and I would expect most new cars coming, most new redesigned vehicles coming to market in the next year or so are going to be adding USB-C ports in there.
Yeah, so it seems like Nissan, at a time when sedans aren't really a thing, and that's kind of a nonsense statement too. Like, sales are down, but they still sell a few 100,000 sedans as a segment. I mean, as a segment, mid-sized sedans, still a 1.5 million units a year. So they've invested heavily. Like, this is a pretty comprehensive redesign. It's not just a refresh.
Yeah, no, it's a completely redone model. It's a little bit more expensive than before. Starts at $23,750. The Platinum all-wheel drive. Let's see.
I think that's like 33 something.
33. So, and it'll be available with the VC turbo I think sometime in the spring. And that'll be available on the Platinum as well. Actually, looking at this, it looks like strangely enough, the VC turbo might be front wheel drive only.
I wonder what that's all about.
That's kind of strange.
If it's maybe the all-wheel drive system can't handle the torque, or
Well, I mean, it's the QX50 is all-wheel drive.
Yeah, so that's weird. I'm trying to make excuses for them. Maybe it's a weight efficiency thing. I don't know.
Yeah, or it may just something to add in, for 2020 model year.
Ah, that's true.
That way, when you do your 20, when the PR guys do their 2020 model year update press release, they have something to point to.
Right.
Yes.
First ever
Altima with a VC turbo and all-wheel drive.
Yeah. That must be it. So the question, I heard them talking this up on Autoline, and so the line about the Altima is now it's grown, so it's the classic sort of longer, lower, wider.
Except it's not. It's almost identical. It's like it's within an inch on all dimensions to the previous generation.
They made it enough where they could say that it is without actually anyway, I guess my question is, where does this leave, especially with the VC turbo engine, where does this leave the Maxima? Because it's, the Maxima's not really, it's kind of an odd man out, and I know that it...
And it's always been kind of an odd man out, because the Maxima is slightly larger than the Altima. It's always been a little more premium than the Altima. I haven't looked at all of the updates. They're refreshing it for 2020 model year, the Altima, that is. It's got a new front fascia, new lights, some interior updates. But I haven't looked at the full list of everything that they've added in there. I know that, it is available with ProPilot on the Altima. One area where there is a distinction is the Altima is still available with a V6. In fact, it's only available with a V6. So no more V6 on the did I say Altima? The Maxima is only available with a V6, and the Altima is 4-cylinder only now. So it's hard to say, really.
Yeah, I just the Maxima crossed over because it had been that mid-sized model, and the Altima had been somewhat smaller. Then I don't know, I guess in the early 2000s, like 2005, 2006, something like that. Maybe a little earlier, 2002 or whatever. They made the Altima larger, which gave the Maxima, I guess, the ability to be this sort of semi-premium, like it became Nissan's Buick in that sense. But with that sporty reputation, and it still kind of has that. But it's in this place where it's somewhat luxurious, somewhat sporty, but not overtly in either direction. It's not an Infinity.
It does have a more aggressive look to it.
It does. I actually love the styling of it. I think it's been it was restyled. I can't remember when it was last restyled, but it's
3 years ago.
Is that new? I was gonna say it stayed pretty fresh. I like it. It's interesting. It drives pretty well, and it is comfortable and luxurious and still pretty decently entertaining to drive. The last time I had one, I liked it quite a bit, but it's just. I mean, I'm just confused about where it fits in their lineup. And I think Nissan is also confused about it.
Yeah. The Altima or the Maxima has the same wheelbase as the previous generation Altima, which was 109.3 inches. And that's actually less than the new Altima. The new Altima is 111.2. So the wheelbase grew by 2 inches. And the overall length of the Altima previously was 192. The overall length of the Maxima was 192.8, which is just shy of an inch longer than the old Altima. And it's now the new Altima is 192.9. So the Altima grew by an inch. So it's a tenth of an inch longer than the Maxima. And they're the same width. The same height. The new Maxima, the new Altima. These names. The new Altima is an inch lower than the old Altima. It's almost identical to the Maxima now. So it's hard to make the case for why the Maxima still exists.
Yeah.
Other than having the V6, at 300 horsepower, which obviously gives it some extra performance, and the styling.
Yeah, and maybe just the overall perception of the model. I think that is actually one of the distinctions, is the Maxima has a different buyer than the Altima.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just curious. It's interesting to me.
All right. So what have you been driving?
So I actually got another all new 2019 model. I got the 2019 Kia Forte EX.
Ooh, what'd you think of it?
My first impression is that it's let me pull up my notes here. If we need
just by the way you're hemming and hawing there.
No. Well, I actually have a lot of good things to say about it. I think if you needed more proof that Kia's team for styling are masters at what they do, the Forte is another example. Like, the outside is really handsome. Kia says that they gave it some design touches from the Stinger. I'm not exactly seeing that, but it definitely looks very good. It looks refined. I think this is a car you can park next to the European sort of usual suspects, and I don't think it shrinks at all. It's really crisp. It's really clean. It looks pretty premium. So those are all positives in my opinion. And to the point where I saw an earlier Forte this morning, and I was like, oh, that's kind of blobby. That was also not a bad looking car, but the new one looks better. Looks expensive, and the interior also follows the same pattern. The look of the instrument panel is good as you'll find anywhere. It's a nice environment. The materials in the EX are pretty good. It has leather seats with the heated seats and heated and cooled seats. This one has the moon roof. It's not super tight. It's a small car, but it's not dinky small, so it's useful. And all the controls are really well done, and as Kia tends to do. And I think for even the base model, the FE. It's a lot of car for about $18,000. It has standard collision avoidance. There's an 8-inch display in there that's standard. Although I think you have to option up to get navigation and stuff. But the display will be there at least for the rear view camera. And there's standard lane keeping assistance and Android Auto and collision avoidance. So it's got a lot of decent safety features that I think will help sell it. The issue, I think, comes when you drive. Have you driven one?
Not yet. I've got one scheduled right after I get back from CES.
All right. So I'll be interested to see what you have to say about it, because the powertrain is the really interesting story here. It's got they all use the same Atkinson cycle 2-liter 4-cylinder. And so that to me is interesting, that they're using that on its own rather than pairing it with the hybrid powertrain that you usually see an Atkinson cycle engine with. Because the thing with the Atkinson cycle is that it has a longer expansion. There's a longer expansion period during the cycle, so it uses less fuel and it gets more work out of it. But by doing that, it
also has less torque.
Right.
Less torque.
And it brings down the sort of the peak power. And so it's powerful enough. I'm actually impressed with that they got 147 horsepower and 132 foot-pounds of torque out of it. Those are decent 2-liter numbers, no matter what cycle. They're okay.
I mean, by current, by 2018, 2019 standards. So, a normal, 2-liter 4-cylinder, naturally aspirated 2-liter 4-cylinder, anywhere from 165 to 180 horsepower, is actually not, that's actually more typical for an auto cycle engine, as opposed to an Atkinson cycle. Yeah.
I mean, I guess it's not as low as I expected it to be. These are on par with older 2-liter numbers. But it does okay. It does fine. The thing that they managed to do also was pair it with a new, they call it an IVT, so an intelligent variable transmission. It's a CVT. So that takes, I think, some of the edge off of the lower torque figure, because it does that torque multiplication thing at low speed that its CVT is pretty good at, and is actually smooth because it's stepless to a degree. Kia says that they've actually designed this CVT to function like a conventional stepped automatic as much as they can. So it's in that middle ground. It's certainly a perceptibly smooth transmission, if that makes any sense. You notice how unnoticeable it is, I guess. It's just like, this is a pretty slick transmission in this car. It's also a little sluggish off the line, and I think that's frustrating.
And that's because you've only got 132 foot-pounds and it peaks at 4,500 RPM. Yeah,
there's that, and I think just in terms of just responsiveness, it's sluggish too. Just there's a delay when you press on the pedal. It's like, what are you doing? So I don't know if that's a calibration thing or if it's just the CVT needs to wind up a little bit before it goes or what. Like, it's once it just actually like gets moving, it's fine. It'll clip along. And that's a really interesting combo to me. Like, I'm just and they engineered that transmission in house. Like, and normally with CVTs, a lot of the companies are using transmissions from suppliers. Jatco is a big one. I think Nissan uses Jatco. Ford certainly does, or they had. And I think there's Asian as well, and so there's a few different companies that make transmissions, and they sort of tweak them for the automakers that buy them. Hyundai and Kia have been both in their conventional automatics and now with the CVT, they've been doing transmissions in-house.
And also their dual clutch transmissions are also done in-house.
That's a big investment for them.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is that, they chose to use the Atkinson cycle 2-liter and a CVT in this car, where even in their hybrids, like in the Sonata, in the Hyundai Sonata hybrid and the Kia Optima hybrid, they use the same 2-liter Atkinson engine in there, but it's paired. Their hybrid system, it uses a conventional step ratio automatic, a planetary gear automatic instead of a CVT, and they have the motor goes in between the engine and the transmission. So this is a unique combination. This sounds like something that you would normally find in a hybrid,
right,
but without the electric drive. Except in Hyundai Motor Group's hybrids, they don't use the CVT.
Yeah,
so it's kind of an oddball.
Yeah, I actually really like the way their hybrids operate too, and I think part of that is the stepped automatic versus the CVT. So I mean, it doesn't feel rubber bandy. It just goes down the road. It's the 2 liters, it's a smaller 4-cylinder, so it doesn't have a ton of extra vibration to manage, and it's decently smooth. It does what it does, and it's fine. I did find it interesting that if you want a manual, the only option for you is the base, the FE model, and I'm assuming FE means fuel economy, but the CVT absolutely slays it. The manual
that is odd branding. I would assume that at some point, the current Forte is fairly new. I think it went on sale about 6 months ago, and I would guess that at some point we will see an option for a more powerful engine, probably the 1.6 liter turbo. Because actually the previous generation Forte EX did use the 1.6 liter turbo. So I'm surprised that they're selling an EX with the same powertrain as the other trim levels.
Yeah, it's the same. I checked. Looked to be the same across the board. And like, I think honestly the other stuff that you get with the car is more important than the engine in this class and for most people. And it does just fine. And it's a lot of car in EX trim for $22,000. Like it's a pretty good deal.
That's actually a really good value. When you compare it to most other compacts, like C segment cars of this size, when you're looking at the top trim level now, it's not uncommon to be getting into the $25,000, $26,000, $27,000 range.
Yeah. And that just seems too much to me. And I know, like, we don't necessarily want to start buying our cars or we don't want to continue buying our cars by the pound. I think that has gotten us into trouble. But 22 for a car that's equipped this way feels about right. Like, that doesn't feel too bad. Speaking of things that don't feel too bad, but also don't feel too good, I wish it drove as good as it looked. Powertrain aside, which I think the powertrain is quite slick. The ride is a little stiff. It doesn't really have the body control to be as disciplined as you might find like a Volkswagen vehicle would be. And that's part of Volkswagen's secret sauce, I understand. Overall, it feels solid enough, but I found it a little loud. The steering, the suspension, the dynamics are all kind of work a day versus the sort of bargain sports sedan checks that the styling is writing a little bit. It's a very basic platform. It's got a torsion beam rear axle and McPherson struts. Nothing super fancy, and all of that is fine. And it's actually it means good things for you as an owner, because all of that particular layout tends to be reliable and robust and durable. So those are all good things. It's not as cushy as I like. But it's not terrible.
Well, like I said, at some point we'll probably get, a GT or a sport model that has the 1.6 liter turbo with the DCT and probably the multi-link rear suspension that they have in the Elantra GT, because this car shares its platform with the Hyundai Elantra, and base Elantras have the same torsion beam set up on the rear axle, and the upper trim levels like the GT, the Elantra GT, use a multi-link rear end, which does give it better ride quality and better handling.
Yeah, and I think that if you want it, you'd be able to pay for it. And again, I think it's in that realm of like things that people aren't really going to care about unless they care about it. And then if it's available for them, they'll buy it. But it's a solid little car for the money. It's a fantastic deal, and I think Kia just proves once again that they're doing a lot of things very right. It's just a car that calls attention to itself in a good way, and it delivers sort of on those promises. It's a nice place to spend some time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm looking forward to checking it out for myself in a couple of weeks. So why don't we get into some of the stories we wanted to talk about this week, starting with looking at small cars and weight being a concern. The other day, you responded to a tweet from James Gross. The challenge: find a car model that is lighter weight now than it was at the turn of the century. With the thing heavier is equal to worse for the environment.
And not necessarily true, but.
I mean, true, because, EVs tend to be heavier because, batteries are bulky and, they are arguably better for the environment than, a lighter weight gasoline engine car or diesel engine car.
Sort of.
So, yeah. So, as is often the case, it's maybe a slightly oversimplified argument that is not entirely accurate. And your response to his tweet, was Miata.
Quick draw.
Yeah. Well, and, I did a little, searching around, looking at some current models that I know, are on the lighter side of the spectrum, and going back and comparing them, pulling up specs from KBB.com, my favorite research source for such things. And, it turns out, the Miata is pretty much the only car that is, stayed pretty close to the same weight, actually even since the first generation. The second generation model actually gained a little weight from the first generation, but then they took it back off, and it's now, it weighs about the same as it did in 2000. It's within about I think 6 or 7 pounds.
I have to admit, I was slightly shaky when I said Miata. I was like, it's gotta. That's if there's a car that's as light as it had been,
That's the one. Well, and you're right. It is, you know, almost the same weight. What you know, but when I started thinking about this some more, you know, one of the things that came to mind is the fact that, you know, while yes, you know, if you look at any particular, you know, vehicle nameplate, any particular model line, you know, there has been this inexorable trend over the last 25, 30 years, you know, even going back to the 1970s, of each succeeding generation of a car getting bigger than the one before, weighing more than the one before, having more power than the one before. And that is true. You know, and, you know, the examples that James gave in his original tweet, you know, looking at the Toyota 4Runner, which went from 3,440 to 3,975 pounds, the Tacoma, you know, which went from 3,980 to 4,500 pounds. So it's, you know, all of these vehicles have gotten significantly heavier. But, you know, the thing is, if you look at them just in that way, you know, looking at a nameplate, comparing the nameplate over time as the succeeding generations got bigger, yes, they got heavier. But, you know, if you look at it from a slightly different perspective and look at, you know, comparably sized cars, you know, because because you know, each model line has tended to get bigger over time, you know, what we see now as a compact car is very different from what we saw as a compact car 20 years ago. You know, so, you know, I wrote up a piece for Forbes, and, you know, some examples, you know, if you look at, you know, the Honda Civic today, the current generation Honda Civic, you know, it has grown with every succeeding generation. I mean, if you go back to the first generation Civic in the 1970s,
that thing's teeny.
And yeah, I mean, it is really small.
Is Honda the one that makes the Acti? I don't know. It's key car size anyway. It's teeny.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty close to that. You know, it's small. It was smaller than, you know, what we think of now, you know, as a Mini, or, you know, even a Chevy Spark. You know, some of the smallest cars on the market today. And, you know, in 2000, you know, the 2000 Civic was quite a bit smaller than it is today, and quite a bit lighter. But the current Civic is actually almost exactly the same size as the Accord was in 2000.
Yeah, and I thought your responses were like, they expanded on the theme, and they were thoughtful, and it makes a whole lot of sense. Like, and we've said this before, you know, those smaller, those nameplates for the sort of submodels have now become the sort of mid-size cars, that just because of that sort of I guess it's like a form of entropy, right? Everything just keeps growing.
most stuff, not everything, but most. Yeah. And, you know, the Accord, you know, is a great example. You know, as I mentioned earlier, you know, it's a full size car,
at
least by the EPA classifications. But if you go back to the very first generation Accord, you know, it was smaller than a Honda Fit.
Yeah.
And, you know, it was considered a mid-sized car, you know, back in the late 1970s.
But it came with a standard tape deck here in the US.
That's true. But it was dealer installed. It did not come from the factory that way.
And you could get a Honda-matic. You can't get a Honda-matic today.
Nothing wrong with that.
I think there was a lot wrong with the Honda-matic, if I recall.
Well, no, that's what I mean. There's nothing wrong with the fact that you can't get it today.
Yeah, it's just like a 2-speed, like a Power Glide. Anyway, we're off track. Carry on.
So anyway, you know, I went through and I compared a bunch of these. You know, the Corolla. You know, the new Corolla that just came out from Toyota today is bigger than the Camry was in 2000. And yet it weighs less than that Camry did. And it has a lot more equipment in it. Same thing goes for the current generation Jetta versus the Passat in 2000. You know, so all of those cars are lighter than the comparable equipped or the comparable sized vehicles 20 years ago. But at the same time, you know, they have more airbags. They are massively stronger, you know, in terms of occupant protection.
That's true.
You know, if you crash test, you know, a 2000 Accord and compare the results to a 2019 Civic. Do the same thing with a Camry and today, an old Camry and today's Corolla, or the Jetta versus the old Passat. Those cars, on the same crash tests will perform much, much worse, and your chances of surviving in those old cars are far worse than they are in the current generation cars. And the new ones are also, while being lighter, are also more powerful. They have better performance, and they're more fuel efficient than they were then, and they produce fewer emissions. So, you're getting all these benefits, and you've got all kinds of features that you couldn't get in 2000. You were just talking about the Forte, Dan. It's got heated seats in it.
Yeah, it does.
And leather.
Well, leatherette, but even so.
Well, or
close enough.
Regardless, or things like a touchscreen audio system with support for smartphones. Or navigation systems.
What's interesting is
you couldn't get that, in a compact Kia or Hyundai or anything else 20 years ago.
Yeah. I mean, that's actually that's an under the skin thing across all of the sort of the automotive world. That's really interesting. Is this constant march of the technology that underpins the vehicles has made all kinds of features and functions and reliability really common and much less expensive than it used to be. And the head units or the sort of interfaces that we use, all those touch screens, right? Just the fact that those can run on tiny little electronics, basically, they're smartphones in most ways that are just serving a different purpose. So you've got a smartphone that does what all kinds of gear in 2000 would be required to do. So it's just like everything continues to sort of follow that Moore's law on the electronic side, where it gets smaller, more powerful, more capable, and controller area networks, and now the sort of next generation of that stuff, because CAN is actually pretty old. CAN is 25 years old.
CAN's ancient, and it's in the process of being replaced with automotive Ethernet.
Yeah, so just that has. I mean, that's what makes it possible for the Forte to have all of those features, because it's not as expensive to add them. It's mostly some software, and maybe a different processor, but it's really that was just stuff that just wasn't available back in the day. So the crash standard thing makes me a little sad because I like old cars. But you especially don't want to get hit from the side in anything from 2000. And they were safer than anything that had been developed at that time. Yes, but it's 20 years ago. So if you go watch some side impact tests from those times, you walk away being like, I don't ever want to be in one of those. Another test that they do now that they didn't, they hadn't even thought of 20 years ago was the small offset rigid barrier test. Yeah.
And that's one that's actually, relatively common in the real world. Yep. If it's having, 25% overlap, of basically it's equivalent to, if you're driving down the road and one of the cars drifts across the center line and just, there's a glancing blow of the other car, so it's not a full head on, but, just a partial collision. That actually does, to a car that hasn't been designed specifically for that actually does a shocking amount of damage to a car.
Well, it's
or a truck for that matter.
It focuses all of that energy on a very small surface area, right? Like to actually absorb it. It's even worse if you think about like swerving to avoid the car, right? And now you've gone off the side of the road and you hit a pole,
Yeah.
with, irresistible force meets an unmovable object. That's worse. Because at least with two cars, they sort of they'll react to the crash and they'll sort of ricochet off each other. The pole's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's a test, and I'm sure automakers really don't like that test to a certain degree because it's difficult and it makes
it is a really hard one to do. But because it gets evaluated on new cars, it's not actually even a legal requirement. There's nothing in law, the Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards for occupant protection don't include small offset rigid barrier. It's something that came from testing that was done by IHS, the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety.
You want to make sure you get those stars and those goods, though.
Oh, absolutely. And it is. I mean, the real world benefit that it provides in protecting vehicle occupants in a crash is undeniable. I mean, it is a true benefit. And despite, having to meet these much more rigorous tests than they ever had to do, 10, 15, 20 years ago. And, roof crush is another one that they didn't have to do back then. And now, all the new cars undergo a roof crush test. They've still managed to make these cars lighter through using new materials, using more aluminum, using high strength and ultra high strength steels, making individual components lighter. And, at the same time, that they've added all these features and things like panoramic sunroofs. Look at how many vehicles today have panoramic, have big sheets of glass in the roof.
Yeah.
The thing about glass compared to steel, it's a lot heavier.
It's super heavy.
A typical panoramic sunroof in a car adds about 100 pounds to the weight of the car.
It doesn't absorb any crash energy.
No.
So that's all impressive. The most impressive thing about all of that is they've made these improvements, and the cost when you adjust the dollars so that you're talking this sort of parity in terms of the money, the cars have actually gotten less expensive.
Yeah, I mean, they see,
or at least they haven't gotten shockingly more expensive.
Cars today are not inexpensive, and affordability is very much of an issue. But given all the things that we've added to cars, it's shocking that that the price hasn't gone up a lot more.
Yeah, and we saw the crash stuff. It's sort of this I guess this sort of decade or this 20-year period. Okay, so from the 2000s, it's our emissions era. We talk about the 70s as a particular. It's called the malaise era to a certain degree because it was a Carter quote, but also just it was the first oil crisis, and there was the EPA starting to really mandate fuel economy and emissions standards. And so that put a damper on performance, and the cars reflected that. The thing that we see with crash safety needing to get so much better over the last 20 years is, they did it with older methods, right? And like mild steel. That's why in the mid 2000s you had cars with just huge pillars. Think of that like the 2008 Malibu. Right, just big pillars. Visibility went down. The door sills, the sides of the doors went up, and a lot of that is the side impact, and it's the crash standards meeting those tests. And now they're figuring that out the same way as they figured out performance and fuel economy together, which we have no shortage of.
and it's actually all thanks to computing power. They figured out how to do emissions and fuel economy improvements starting in the 1970s by adding electronic engine control systems. And then they started adding electronics everywhere. And, then over time they started using simulation to do a lot of crash testing and run through a lot of iterations before they ever built prototypes. And that's what, today, when they're designing vehicles, they will run thousands or tens of thousands of crash simulations on a vehicle design before they build a single prototype. and that helps them optimize the structure. And it's a combination of using newly developed materials that didn't exist 25, 30, 40 years ago, and also manufacturing techniques for how they do that. So today, you find things like what they call Taylor rolled blanks for B pillars and other parts. So it used to be that when they would stamp out a body part, they would you would have a flat sheet of steel or aluminum or whatever it was, and it was uniform thickness all the way across. Now what they do is they will actually roll sheets of steel that have varying thickness across the sheet that is specifically designed for that structure. And then they will slice that out and stamp it. And now you have a stamping that will have thicker areas and thinner areas where they need where they need extra strength, and where thinner areas where they want to allow it to actually be able to deform to absorb that impact energy. Another interesting thing that Honda did on the current generation Civic when they designed it, there's some rails at the back, that go through the trunk that extend back, from the central body structure, that the bumper is connected to. It's connected to those two rails, and when they these are hydroformed steel rails, so they're box section steel. And then when they heat treat it, when you heat treat steel, you can make it stronger. By the way you raise the temperature and cool it rapidly, it changes the chemistry of the steel, makes it stronger. But what they do is when they heat treat it, they actually have selective areas of that rail where they actually run cooling water through it, so that there are very specific sections of the rail that are kept softer than the rest of the rail, so that they can have a controlled deformation. So when there's a crash, this rail will actually bend in very specific ways to absorb the crash energy, so that it doesn't get transferred into the passenger compartment.
So they're tempering it like selectively.
Yes.
Huh.
It used to be, you would heat treat the entire piece of metal, and then, or temper it, to get the properties you want. And it would be the same properties throughout that entire piece. Now they can take a piece of metal and they can have very different properties at very specific locations in it in order to get it to behave in a particular way.
Huh. Yeah. See, there's a lot that's going on with the metal benders. You want to talk about innovation, like that, all that stuff. The Cadillac CT6, actually, the details of that body structure are pretty impressive too.
Oh yeah. I mean, that was the first production vehicle where they actually were able to, GM came up with a way to weld aluminum to steel.
Yeah. Without the galvanic corrosion that typically happens. And that's really like the fact that they're welding aluminum to steel. Like, you can't do that in your garage with like your Lincoln, Ready Arc or whatever. Like, no, they use different heats, different, just that's not going to happen. But once you put those two metals in contact with each other, they act like a battery. So GM figured something out. I'm not sure what, or they just don't care.
No, they actually came up with some unique manufacturing processes to do that. Another interesting one is on the Acura NSX. The structure of that, there's some areas where they are joining different grades of aluminum. And what they did was they actually initially joined them with using industrial adhesives, and the adhesive actually acts as, it joins the aluminum components, and then they're also joining steel reinforcements there, because where they attach the suspension components, and so they're joining different grades of aluminum and steel together, and they're using the industrial adhesive as an insulator to keep those different metals from actually coming into physical contact with each other while still joining them. and that prevents the corrosion.
That's really interesting. And structural adhesives are a thing that have gotten more and more prevalent in use. And I think that's one of the reasons, it sounds simple, right? But it's one of the reasons why cars perform better in crash tests. It's why they're tighter, to drive. They feel better. And they got glue in places where they didn't before.
Yeah. And a lot of, there's, if you're interested in, looking at some more details of, kind of the overall trends of how vehicles have changed over the last 40 years. There's an interesting report that gets published every year by the EPA, their fuel economy trends report, that has a lot of fascinating data in it. And there's one particular table in there that, kind of is an overview of fleet average fuel economy, average weight, average size, since they started tracking this stuff in 1975. And, it turns out that in 1975, the average weight of the entire U.S. vehicle fleet was 4,060 pounds.
We're above that now.
It's 16 pounds lower. It's
really?
4,044 pounds. Yes.
I'm surprised with the proliferation. Well, we'll pass that soon.
Not necessarily, because, if you look at, where a lot of the growth in the market is, it's in smaller utilities that are, under 4,000 pounds.
True. And they're most like those are essentially cars. It's not like the body on frame trucks of the old days. So that's interesting.
And at the same time, while weight hasn't gone up, we've more than doubled fuel economy of the average fleet fuel economy from 13 miles per gallon to over 25 miles per gallon.
Yeah, cars are pretty amazing. Do you know I think the very first car to use computer analysis of its structure during the design phase?
Not off the top of my head, but I have a feeling you know the answer to this question.
Valiant.
Really?
In 1959, when they were designing the Valiant. I don't know whether it was like finite element. I don't think it was like finite element.
No, it wouldn't have been. They wouldn't have had the computing power to do finite element. That didn't come along till the 1970s.
Okay. They ran lots and lots and lots of mathematical models of it just to figure out, the structural rigidity and increase its torsional strength, at least. If you can find, I think it's Popular Science. So if you go to Google Books, all the Popular Science stuff is there from way back. So you can find, 1959 or 1960, Valiant was like a cover car for them. And that was one of the things that I remember reading was like, they used computers to figure out the structure. And those early Valiants feel very tight. Compared to the other stuff, the unibody, which was rare for the time, but it's not like you think about, they don't build them like they used to. And it's like, back in the day when they
built them a hell of a lot better.
When they figured this stuff out, like it made a big difference then, and it continues to make a big difference now. I just thought it was wild that they used computers for it back then. But yeah, all
right. So, moving along.
Clearly, we are super geeky.
Yes. The Toyota Supra is coming back in a little over a week. We're going to finally see the full production version. Actually, there's some leaked pictures of it out there.
We've seen it in yellow. We've seen it in red.
Yeah. But it's going to be officially revealed at the Detroit Auto Show in about a week and a half. But the last generation Supra, which I guess was the fourth generation in the 1990s, was it's kind of one of those legendary Japanese sports cars. Although not so legendary that it sold in such huge numbers at the time that it prompted Toyota to keep it in production.
It was expensive, and it was part of that class of the last generation of sports cars of its type when the Japanese economy was just humming, and
right.
The FD RX-7 is in the same era, same class as this car, and the 300ZX twin turbo. or just the 300ZX and the Mitsubishi 3000, same thing. Like they were all these super sophisticated sort of bonkers supercars that they were expensive to buy here in the States, but they offered a lot of performance and sophistication for relatively short money. And so they were this touchstone for a certain generation of us, that Supra. I remember that Supra from being in high school, and just that I liked the RX-7 better, but that car was a hell of a car.
Yeah. Well, a prime example of that last Supra from 1994. There's one that's out there that has just over 7,000 miles on it. Which, for a car, that old is pretty good. That's pretty low mileage.
That's it. You got to replace every seal in it.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause it's probably been sitting, in a garage or a warehouse for the last 20 years. But the owner, recently put it up for sale on Bring a Trailer, and, it went for $121,000.
Yeah. So how do you feel about that?
I think that's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a nice car, but it's not worth 120 grand. Come on. I don't care how few miles it has on it.
So low miles cars, and I have one in the driveway. Low miles cars are a nightmare because that means they haven't been driven enough. And so they get, they get rickety, it's almost like they get rigor mortis just from sitting, everything sort of just wears, cars need to be driven. And, the low miles cars, yes, like it's beautiful. It like looking at the pictures of this, it looks showroom perfect. But with 7,000 miles on it too,
without a pretty thorough rebuild, it's not really going to be something that you can drive, unless you want to keep it in a museum or something, it's not worth it.
It's
crazy.
That's stupid money for.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you would honestly spend the same restoring one for sure, to the same caliber. So there is that, but cars are not an investment.
Most cars are not an investment.
Yeah.
There are a few that could be considered that, where they're, very extremely low volume, but old Supras are not that rare.
It's a fun car. It's kind of a shame because with 7,000 miles on it, you're going to be really gun shy about driving it. I mean, I hope that the new owner isn't. I just drive the damn thing, enjoy it. It's only metal, just go,
That's right.
Go have a good time. It's got a turbo 2JZ, which is, it's a hell of an engine. It is the stuff of legend. It's all of the sort of tropes and memes and whatever, like that. That is the car that embodies all of that. It's a twin turbo 6-speed Supra. All of the little numbers and stuff like it, that's the car that carries them. So it's a worthwhile sort of good time to actually use it. I just, it'll be interesting though. Tomorrow, so it'll probably be on the next episode of the podcast, but tomorrow I'm talking with Haggerty Insurance, because they put out a release not too long ago that said, Gen Xers and millennials are now the majority in the classic car world. So tomorrow I'm going to talk with who am I talking with? Jonathan Klinger.
Oh, Jonathan Klinger?
Yeah. From Haggerty.
Tell him I said hi.
I will. But it's a really interesting point, and I was kind of waiting for it to happen, right? Because since time immemorial for me, every car show has been a sock hop, and that's cool. I like cars from the 50s and 60s, and I really like the hot rods from that era too, because they're fascinating. But now there's this. You got shows like Radwood and stuff where there's this group of us that we actually appreciate the cars from that malaise era, from the 80s, from the 90s. And so you're going to see more of these. And it's cool that they're kind of getting their due. But that's a stupid price for that car. That's too much money.
Yeah, I mean, my Miata, is relatively low mileage, given its age. It's a 1990 with, just shy of 60,000 miles on it, and I take it out, when the weather's nice, I take it out and drive it at every opportunity. And I put a couple thousand miles a year on it. And, I love it, and then, in the wintertime, it doesn't get exposed to salt, but, I make sure to, go out in the garage every week and fire it up and let it run for 10 or 15 minutes and, just keep the fluids circulating and, keep everything in good shape. And that's the way an old car like that should be. I mean, you're probably not going to want to use it as a daily driver, but, it should be exercised regularly and used for what a car is supposed to be used for.
Yeah. Although, I hope that whoever had the $120,000 to buy this does whatever they want with it and enjoys it, whatever they do with it, however they do.
I guess whatever gives them pleasure.
Because it's not my car. So,
or your money.
I have opinions, and I have expressed those opinions, and now I will say, do what you want with it, because it's your car. And I don't think we can get any better than that.
All right. One more story, which kind of follows on from a previous discussion we had about EV charging, high-speed EV charging and, the need for, taking some care in terms of figuring out where you put charging stations to, in order to make sure there's enough capacity to actually support the vehicles. And it was, I did a radio interview with somebody the other day about this, talking about this some more because there was some stuff that came up, some stories that came up with, more Tesla owners complaining about, lining up, waiting for superchargers. And then when they finally get to the charger, because all the chargers are in use, they're not running at full speed. You're not getting the full 120 kilowatts of charging power. They're getting like 20, 25 kilowatts. So it's taking a lot longer to charge. And, one of the things that, companies are doing, to try to mitigate that is putting big battery packs, backup battery packs, on these charging stations to make sure they have enough capacity and enough power, to support, full speed charging on these things. This story that you found, Dan, is from Green Tech Media, is kind of interesting. Another Alphabet company that's being spun off. You want to talk about it a little bit?
Yeah, what I found interesting about it was that, batteries right now are sort of, you default to lithium ion. Like that's just the sort of most common technology, certainly in the cars and for grid storage. But when you get that to scale up, A, it's expensive, and B, it can't really time shift the energy consumption beyond, 24 hours or so. Like you store up the energy when the sun's shining and you use it at night. So when you try to extend that out, that storage, what you're really looking at is a solution that's more like an electromechanical solution, right? Where they'll pump water or some other way of getting longer term storage of that excess energy to be used when it's necessary, when it's not viable, or to make it in another renewable way. So,
yeah, so you can do things, you said pump water, you can use solar power to run a pump that, pumps water up into a reservoir. And then when the sun is gone, you can let that power run, or let that water run back down through a turbine to generate hydroelectric power.
Yeah, it's super clever. And I think it's a very elegant approach. But there's, battery chemistry comes into play as well. And there's a lot of different sort of competing research going on, and not even competing, but just sort of parallel research, because, lithium ion batteries are expensive, and other chemistries are also expensive, and you're using, you're not being super renewable or environmentally friendly when you're mining, precious rare earth materials either. So they're trying to find ways of storing energy in molten salt, which is what this company Malta was that was spun out of Alphabet is doing. And I don't know exactly sort of the chemistry that they're using and sort of how they're doing it, but basically it heats the salt and then they get the energy out of that. And it's much less expensive than lithium ion, and they're trying to build out a full scale plant and get it on the grid to sort of learn how it's going to work. And it's not really something that you're going to see in your cars, but it's something that you're going to see like we were talking about at those supercharger stations or something. It's just, like the battery.
Yeah, it's a form of large scale, stationary storage. It's not for mobile applications.
Right. And I heard I don't think it was Malta, but I heard another very fascinating interview with another local company that sort of spun out of MIT, where they're saying, like, look, if you want batteries to be as cheap as dirt, make them out of dirt. And so they're working on things like where they're not using really exotic materials. You're trying to use off-the-shelf components, but some of the problem with that too is that you run into the limitations of what those off-the-shelf components are designed for. So there's a couple things going on. Like, the idea works on paper. Then you've got to move the idea from paper to that test plant. But the test plant has to be, if you want to do it at scale, it's almost like you have to test it at scale. And I think that's the point that they're at now is they were spun out of Alphabet, and I think they've built the funding, or their next step is to say, like, well, look, if we're going to make a big battery installation, we need to make a big battery installation, because otherwise we're building all kinds of custom stuff around this, even just like, cranes and stuff like that, like, because that's, gravity storage is another thing that is coming up. I didn't realize there were so many different approaches to just like, how do we convert this, like, solar or even just, natural gas electricity? How do we convert it into a form that we can then tap in a sustainable, sort of non-polluting way? And so you think about, okay, well, we convert it into kinetic energy, right? Where it's just, you're dropping weights and those are spinning gears and that spins a turbine, and that, I don't know. Very, very fascinating.
Yeah, and one of the keys to doing this, because one of the big issues with renewable energy, whether it's wind or solar in particular, it's not so much a problem with hydro. That tends to be fairly consistent, but wind and solar, tends to be inconsistent, for various reasons. And so, what you need to do is capture as much of it as you can when it's available, and store it, so that you can have a consistent availability of it, a consistent availability of power to the users, while capturing it intermittently. And so things like what Malta is doing, and various other schemes for storing large amounts of energy are important. But the other piece of that, is you want to make the energy transfer process as efficient as possible as well. Because if you're storing energy, from, that's generated in one way in, some different sort of medium, you don't want to have a lot of losses when you're going back and forth between those, because that, kind of negates the purpose. So you want, when you're going back and forth between, storing it in molten salt and going back to electricity, there's got to be maximum efficiency, transfer efficiency there. Yeah,
and it seems like what they're doing is they're using a heat pump to actually get the energy into the salts or into an antifreeze liquid. So either heating or cooling, and then they use a Stirling engine, or they call it a heat engine. To me, that's a Stirling engine. Where it's just the medium keeps transferring and cooling, and it runs the cylinder to get the energy back out. So yeah, that has promise. All of those things on their own are sort of pretty well understood, and you put the technologies together, and the cost can be kept down. They're not exotic in that sense. They need to run and develop some actual data about how it's going to work, and maybe find the problems, because that long-term storage is really the key. I mean, think about like a Tesla Powerwall, right? Like that's power for your house, but it's still like it's not a real long.
It's fairly small scale.
Yeah. But what if you could store power for months? That it seems like the holy grail of getting it there. So it's cool, and battery technology here could translate into cars. Although this again, like this is sort of the slow, steady kind of thing. I doubt that we're going to see molten salt batteries running Stirling engines in cars. But there's always learning that can transfer.
Yeah, and they probably won't be powering the cars directly, but they, like you said, they could be powering the high speed DC chargers that get them back on the road quickly.
Right, or a range extender, I mean, range extender might be a little bit of a stretch. Either way, like and I think that the next breakthrough in battery tech is going to come from one of these industries versus the automotive industry, because the automotive industry, they're working on it, but their demands are like, we need immediate power now, versus like, no, we need some power later. It's a little bit different. That's mostly my opinion, but we'll see.
All right.
Yeah.
Let's, we got a couple questions before we wrap it up. One from my buddy, former colleague, Chris Terry, asked on Twitter, did reality bite future of AVs in the last couple of months of 2018? Saw a lot of Doubting Thomas type pieces in December. Yes, it did. In fact, over the course of the last year and a half, the trend I saw from all the people I talked to in the automated vehicle industry is, the realization that there's still a lot of challenges that they're trying to figure out, whether it's, weather, figuring out the prediction engines, for predicting what, particularly pedestrians are going to do next. Just general characterization of or classification of the objects that the sensors see. It's a really hard problem to do, and the rollout of this stuff is going to be a lot slower than a lot of proponents were projecting a couple of years ago. So, it's going to be tough for everybody. And, this is an area we'll be talking about more, going forward. The other question was from Jeremy Kroll, came in via email. And it says, can you please give us some recommendations of magazines for people that would like to know the current and possible future state of the automotive industry?
Oh, we should make a magazine.
Well, most people think of, there's a good way to turn a large pile of cash into a tiny one. Well, most people think of Car and Driver, Road and Track, Motor Trend, and Automobile as car magazines, but from my past experience, admittedly years ago, they were more about cars overall and not the technologies that will shape the industry. Sadly, some say magazines are old-fashioned these days, and some people think that they're too slow to be of any consequence in these times of 24/7 information. But I think that for long-form informational stories, magazines are still some of the best places to go.
I completely agree.
Yes. And I think, one of the things you're going to be looking for, based on the question here, rather than the kind of general interest stuff that you're going to find in the buff books, there's a lot of great content in those magazines, but and you're occasionally going to find some interesting technical articles, especially, some of the stuff that Don Sherman writes in Car and Driver and Frank Marcus does in Motor Trend. But, I think if you're really looking for a deeper dive on some of this stuff, you're going to be looking for some of the trade publications, and, one that I can always recommend is, Automotive Engineering Magazine.
Yeah.
It's the magazine put out by the Society of Automotive Engineers. Features a monthly column by some guy with a beard talking about autonomous vehicles every month.
It's funny. I have an Automotive Engineering magazine tab open right now because they had an article about the Kia CVT.
Okay.
But I was finding back issues of that when I was in college, because the same thing, like it's a completely different world. You'll be blown away if you've never looked at one of those issues. Like even just the ads, you'd be like, "What the hell is this stuff?" It's not like the Viagra replacements that you'll find in Car and Driver. It's like actual like bearings and tie rod ends and stuff. It's really, even that's just interesting, learning the suppliers and the all of that aspect of it. What about automotive news? I know it's kind of expensive, but
there is some good there's a lot of great content in automotive news. If you're looking for more in-depth technical stuff, the articles in automotive news tend not to be so long form. They tend to be relatively shorter articles, but there's some great stuff in there, especially stuff that Rich Truitt writes on on the engineering side, the work that the mobility team there is doing now, led by Sharon Carty and Pete Bigelow recently joined the team there after leaving Car and Driver, and so there's some great work being done there. So, I would take a look at that. You can read, some number of articles a month, for free online. And then the magazine, if you want to get it's a weekly, comes out every Monday, and I think it's $99 a year, if I recall correctly. Another one to take a look at, is Automotive World. If you go to automotiveworld.com, they've got their magazine, and, they've got, a lot of good stuff in there as well. But, generally, I would look towards some of the more trade oriented publications like those, for this sort of content.
Yeah. The enthusiast press exists for its own purpose. Where, like, I think if you're in the business, or you just want to understand the nuts and bolts of it without so much purple prose, those three are really the place to go. And from overseas, what's the Swedish one? Is it Teknikens Varld? It's a bunch from Europe that are also interesting, but you have to be able to translate them. Or find English language versions of them. Some of them have English language versions, but those three are probably a good start.
All right, so with that, let's call it a week.
Yeah, I think that's good. So Happy New Year, everyone, and we'll see you next time.
All right, bye.